Scrum's major contributions are in the management area, so it's not surprising that Scrum takes a shot at completely redefining the traditional manager responsibilities that we saw in the previous segment. In fact, in strict Scrum, there is no such thing, no such role as a manager. The traditional tasks of the manager are split between three different roles: the self-organizing team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. The last two are people. The first one is a group of people which collectively takes a certain number of critical decisions. So let's review those three roles in turn. The team, as I said, is a group of people, so it's an actor in the same sense as the chorus in a Greek tragedy, but it has responsibility for many of the fundamental managerial tasks. A Scrum team, and in general an Agile team, this is a theme that runs through other Agile methods as well, in particular extreme programming, is cross-functional. What does that mean? Well, in the Agile world, we don't want to have narrow specialties, and we don't want in particular to have people who feel they own a particular expertise in the project and as a consequence a particular piece of the code or the product. We will see this again in the discussion of practices when we review the practices called shared code ownership. But here what's important is that the team is cross-functional, meaning we don't have anyone who is in charge solely of a certain area. So we may have experts, for example, we may have people who know more about object-oriented methodology, about databases, about networks, or any particular specialty that is needed by the project, but no one owns any particular area. And this means in particular in the Scrum view that we have a list of tasks to be fulfilled for a certain iteration, and whenever someone becomes available, he or she takes one of these tasks. Well, we want essentially anyone to be able to take on any task. That's what it means by cross-functional. No narrow specialization, no personal ownership of an area. Scrum also specifies an ideal team size based on a famous paper in psychology about the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. Well, the ideal size of a team is 7 plus or minus 2 members. Does this mean that Scrum is limited to small or relatively small projects, medium scale projects? Not necessarily. There is a notion of Scrum of Scrums, which we will review also as part of practices, which is intended to tackle big projects. So as the name suggests, a Scrum of Scrums is a group of individual projects that are coordinated at a higher level, but each one of them remains a standard Scrum project with this kind of number of members. Part of the responsibility of the team, which of course is very important, is for a particular iteration, not for the project as a whole, but for a particular iteration of the project, to select the major goals for the iteration and the results that are going to be released by this iteration, known in Scrum as a sprint. So that's of course a key role, especially since it goes with the next two. The team organizes itself and its work, so you don't have a nanny, so to speak, which tells the team where to go and what to do on a step-by-step basis. It's really the team that decides to assign the tasks to its member and organize the work. The team can really do everything it likes as long as it thinks that is going to help reaching these goals, and as long, of course, as what it does fits within the rules, within the guidelines that have been defined for the project. And of course, at the end of an iteration, and maybe even before, in some cases, the team will have to demonstrate its results to the product owner, who, as we are going to see, is the one who decides in the end what passes and what doesn't pass as a suitable result. So these are very important responsibilities. They correspond to much of what traditional managers do, and they are farmed out in Scrum to the collective actor, the collective role of the team. In meetings of a sprint or in meetings of a Scrum project, you are going to have to decide who is permitted to talk freely and who is just on the sidelines, because meetings may be of interest not just to the team itself but to some other participants, for example representatives of other projects with which the team is collaborating, and there's a risk that the meetings get out of hand. And in order to keep the meetings focused and short, not everyone can speak at any particular time, so there's a distinction between core participants, the team proper, and fellow travelers. The core participants are those who are permitted to participate actively in the meeting, and the fellow travelers are there to listen, and they will participate actively but only if asked. This is also known as committed people and involved people, and sometimes in the Scrum literature based on an old 1950s joke, which I will not repeat here: pigs for those who are committed and chickens for those who are only involved. The next Scrum role is the product owner. The basic idea of the product owner, who is a person, not a group, is that he or she is responsible for ensuring the interface with the customer and making sure, more precisely, that the product meets the customer's needs and expectations. So the product owner is going to define the product features, he or she is going to decide on the release date, and of course the two go together, since product features are great but only if they are delivered within our lifetime. So time is very important, and we saw the discussion in Ken Beck's citation at the very beginning of the course on this combination between timing constraints and functionality constraints. The product owner decides also on the content of any major release, not just the final product but intermediate releases as well, although he is not in charge of individual small sprints, small iterations. That is, as you remember, the task of the team itself, the self-organizing team. There's a strong emphasis in Scrum on business aspects, and in particular on profitability. A term that recurs in Scrum discussions is ROI, return on investment, and the product owner is responsible for that view of the project, which is not necessarily the first one of a typical developer, making sure that the project returns and delivers value to the customer. The product owner prioritizes features. Of course, in a project, typically we want lots of features, even if, as we've seen, Agile has a strong minimalistic view, trying to limit the set of features. Well, still, we might define more features than we can implement. We might bite more than we can chew. And the need here is for prioritization. We need to know ahead of time what features are essential and what features are nice to have but less essential, so that when the going gets tough, we know what to sacrifice. And so this is one of the responsibilities of the product owner, prioritization. There's a rule in Sprint that a product owner can change features and priority, but only over a limited period, typically 30 days. And the major responsibility in the end of the product owner is to decide whether a particular release or the final product has resulted in something that can be presented, can be handed over to the customer as satisfactory or not. So the product owner is the one who says, yes, this is good enough, or no, you need to get back to work, we cannot give this to the customer. And of course, it's a major responsibility. The third and last role in Scrum is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is a person, again, it's not a group, but it's a person in this case, who is responsible for enforcing the methodology, in this case, of course, the Scrum methodology. So you can think of him or her as a kind of political commissar who makes sure that the team properly applies the defined philosophy, not only Scrum as a whole, but particular guidelines and rules that may have been defined at the level of the company and at the level of the particular project. But the Scrum Master actually does more. So here are some of the tasks: to ensure that the team is functional and productive, to enable cooperation across all roles and functions of the team, to shield the team from external interferences. As we've seen, there is sometimes a natural trend for upper management and other parts of the company to meddle into the daily work of the team, and that can be quite disruptive. It's part of the role of the Scrum Master to serve as what I earlier called an umbrella to protect the team from such undue interferences. The Scrum Master, as I've mentioned, is the political commissar who is there to enforce the Scrum process, in particular to organize the daily meetings, which we'll review as part of the practices lecture, also known as daily Scrums, the planning meetings, the review meetings. He's in charge of that. The Scrum Master, quite importantly, is in charge of helping remove impediments. Impediment is an important notion in Scrum. It's an obstacle. It's anything that affects the progress of the team, known as velocity, another term that we will study in more detail in Scrum. In lean terms, remember the previous lecture, we had this rejection of waste, this injunction to avoid waste, so we can also define impediments as anything that might produce waste, which of course we want to avoid like the plague. So examples of impediments are quite diverse. Hardware limitations assume a situation in which compilations and tests are taking too long because programmers don't have enough memory, so the Scrum Master may be the one who says we need to give everyone an extra 8 gigs of memory because we're wasting time for no good reason. Another completely different example is missing requirements. We saw this also in the study of waste. You are stuck because you don't know what to do in a particular area, and the customer expert who was supposed to give you this information is not available and is not giving it to you. So that's the task of the Scrum Master, to make sure that those kinds of blocks do not occur or are resolved if they do occur. You might be waiting for some software from some other group or from within the group, some library element that you need for your work and it's not ready yet. That's an impediment. You might have management interference or bureaucratic delays, and it's going to be part of the task of the Scrum Master to fight these things and make sure the impediments go away. In strict Scrum methodology, the Scrum Master is only a Scrum Master and normally does not develop himself or herself. And so if there is not enough work to occupy a Scrum Master full-time for your project, the idea is that the Scrum Master shares his time between several projects for which he is only Scrum Master. To go a bit more into the assessment mode here, it's a pretty dangerous idea because it's not so good to have in a project people who are only talkers and not doers. And we may want everyone to roll up their sleeves and participate effectively. So there's no absolute rule here, but the general observation is to be wary of people who are just advice givers and who don't have to live up to the results of their own advice and apply it as developers. I was interested here to see as a comment on a forum, the precise reference is on the bibliography, is in the bibliography, this comment from a reader from India saying, I've seen the trends that organizations in India look forward to hire people with technical skills, not just methodological, but actual technical programming skills. Especially in India, they do not consider Scrum Master as an independent role, but always club, that is to say, combine it with the developer role. They call it technical Scrum Master. So I know that a number of students in this course are from India, and I think it's quite nice to see some words of wisdom coming out of India. I would recommend being careful of hiring people just to give advice. It's probably better if the Scrum Master has extra time to make him or her develop along the rest of the team. In strict Scrum, there is no manager, no role of manager. The tasks, as we've seen, are split between the team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. On the other hand, Scrum authors realize that for some companies this is going to be too much and that they will still want to have a project manager, and so they have some advice for managers if there are any. The managers should do certain things and not do some other things. So they should support the team in its use of Scrum like the Scrum Master does. They should contribute wisdom, expertise, and assistance, so that's kind of the coach and mentoring role. They should not play nanny. They should not assign tasks, get status reports. Such micromanagement is part of the team's responsibilities. Instead, they should play guru, mentor, coach, and so on. So you can see here that we're kind of looking at a manager who is also probably the Scrum Master, or at least has some of the responsibilities of the Scrum Master. There's also the advice that managers may need to evolve their management style. For example, use Socratic style questioning to help the team discover solutions rather than imposing a solution as a traditional Steve Jobs like manager or Henry Ford like manager might do. What we've seen in this segment is the three Scrum roles. Scrum and in general Agile methods strongly curtail the traditional role of the manager. In the next segment we'll see some other roles which replace part of the tasks in other methods, but in Scrum we have three well-defined, precisely defined separate roles: the team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master.